They laughed when the old black man with a sack claimed he owned the bank, until they read the documents that changed everything. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning at First National Bank, a bustling branch located in the heart of downtown Atlanta. Customers shuffled in and out, some with coffee cups in hand, others clutching deposit slips or withdrawal forms. The tellers worked efficiently behind their counters, exchanging pleasantries with familiar faces while keeping one eye on the clock as they neared lunchtime. Everything seemed routine until he walked through the door. An elderly black man entered the bank, his presence immediately drawing attention. He wore faded overalls patched together with care, a wide-brimmed straw hat that shielded his weathered face from the sun, and carried what appeared to be a burlap sack slung over his shoulder. His gait was slow but deliberate, each step echoing softly against the tiled floor. As he approached the front desk, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the room like waves crashing against a shore. "Who's this guy?" someone muttered under their breath. Another customer chuckled quietly, shaking their head. "Looks like he's here to sell vegetables." The staff exchanged amused glances, unsure whether to take him seriously. No one could have predicted how profoundly this unassuming stranger would alter the course of their day, and possibly their lives. The air inside the bank was thick with anticipation, though no one could have predicted what was about to unfold. The old man stood at the counter, his presence commanding despite his unassuming appearance. His overalls were patched meticulously, each stitch a testament to years of hard work and resilience. His straw hat cast a shadow over his weathered face, but it couldn't conceal the sharpness in his eyes, a gaze that seemed to pierce through pretense and skepticism like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He carried himself with an aura of quiet authority, as if he knew something no one else did. And indeed, he did. When Lisa, the young teller behind the counter, greeted him with a polite smile and asked how she could assist him, the old man didn't hesitate. With deliberate movements, he placed the sack onto the counter. It landed with a soft thud, shifting slightly under its own weight, hinting at the contents within. The sound alone drew attention. Curious glances from nearby customers, whispers rippling through the lobby like ripples on a pond. For a moment, all activity paused as people turned their focus to this unexpected visitor. "I'm here to claim ownership of this bank," he said, his voice steady and resonant, cutting through the ambient hum of conversation like a blade. There was no trace of doubt or hesitation in his tone. Instead, there was a calm certainty that caught everyone off guard. Lisa blinked twice, certain she must have misheard him. Ownership? This frail-looking elderly man. Surely, this was some kind of misunderstanding, or worse, a prank designed to disrupt the day's routine. "Excuse me, sir," Lisa stammered, leaning forward slightly as if proximity might clarify things. "Ownership of this bank?" "That's correct," the old man replied without missing a beat. His words hung in the air like smoke after a firecracker explodes. Not immediately understood, but impossible to ignore. "This establishment belongs to me, or rather, my family." At first, silence reigned supreme. The absurdity of the statement left most people too stunned to react. But then, laughter began to bubble up from various corners of the room. It started softly, a chuckle here, a snicker there, but quickly grew louder as more people joined in. Some patrons doubled over, clutching their sides while tears streamed down their cheeks. Others exchanged incredulous looks, shaking their heads as if witnessing the punchline of a particularly absurd joke. Even some of the bank employees struggled to maintain composure, hiding giggles behind their hands or pretending to busy themselves with paperwork. To them, the notion of this humble senior citizen owning such a prestigious financial institution was laughable. After all, banks weren't claimed by men carrying sacks. They were owned by corporate giants, wealthy families, and powerful investors who wielded influence far beyond the reach of ordinary people. This man looked like he belonged in a farmer's market selling produce, not making bold declarations about property rights. To many, his assertion seemed less like a legitimate claim and more like the ramblings of someone out of touch with reality. Yet, amid the growing cacophony of amusement, the old man remained completely unfazed. If anything, the laughter only seemed to embolden him further. Instead of retreating or showing any sign of embarrassment, he reached into the burlap sack and pulled out a stack of yellowed documents tied together with fraying twine. The papers were worn and brittle, their edges curled with age, but they bore an undeniable air of significance. Placing them carefully on the counter, he gestured toward them with pride, as though presenting evidence in a courtroom drama. "These papers prove my claim," he stated simply, his voice cutting through the noise like a bell tolling midnight. "Take a look if you don't believe me." His confidence was magnetic, drawing the attention of those around him once again. The laughter subsided, replaced by murmurs of curiosity. People craned their necks to get a better view of the mysterious documents. What exactly did they contain? Could they possibly validate such an extraordinary claim? Despite their initial skepticism, there was something undeniably compelling about the way the old man carried himself. He exuded a sense of purpose that made it difficult to dismiss him outright. Lisa hesitated, unsure whether to humor him or call security. On one hand, the situation felt increasingly surreal, bordering on disruptive. On the other hand, the old man's demeanor suggested he wasn't bluffing. She glanced nervously at her colleagues, seeking guidance, but they appeared just as uncertain as she was. Before anyone could decide on a course of action, Mr. Thompson, the bank manager, arrived on the scene. Mr. Thompson was a tall, impeccably dressed man in his late 40s, known for his polished demeanor and authoritative presence. As he approached the counter, his polished loafers clicked sharply against the marble floor, announcing his arrival before he even spoke. His expression was a mixture of irritation and intrigue, clearly unimpressed by the disruption, but curious enough to investigate personally. "What seems to be the issue here?" Mr. Thompson asked, his tone clipped yet professional. "This gentleman claims to own the bank," Lisa explained, still struggling to suppress a nervous laugh. Mr. Thompson raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Sir, do you understand the seriousness of making such a statement? This is a federally regulated institution." "I am well aware of its status," the old man interrupted, his voice unwavering, "and I assure you, my claim is legitimate. These documents will confirm everything." There was a long pause as Mr. Thompson studied the old man's face, searching for any hint of deception. Finding none, he reluctantly picked up the bundle of papers and began flipping through them. At first glance, they appeared ancient, brittle edges, ink faded by time. But as he read further, his expression shifted dramatically. Names, dates, and signatures leaped off the pages, connecting dots that no one in the room could have anticipated. Each document told a story, weaving together a narrative of loss, betrayal, and resilience. "These deeds," Mr. Thompson muttered, almost to himself. "They're real." The room fell silent once again, the tension palpable. The laughter that had filled the space just moments earlier now felt like a distant memory, replaced by a collective sense of unease. People leaned closer, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the mysterious documents. What had started as a joke now felt dangerously close to becoming reality. For the old man, this moment represented decades of patience and perseverance. He had waited years, decades, for this opportunity, preserving his family's legacy despite countless obstacles. Now, standing in the very institution that had once been stolen from them, he allowed himself a small, knowing smile. Justice, it seemed, was finally within reach. In that instant, the atmosphere in the bank transformed entirely. No longer was the old man seen as a figure of ridicule. Instead, he became a symbol of determination and truth. His bold declaration had forced everyone present to confront uncomfortable truths about history, power, and privilege. And though the journey ahead would undoubtedly be fraught with challenges, one thing was certain. The old black man with the sack had already begun to rewrite the narrative, one document at a time. The transformation in the room was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. The laughter that had erupted so freely moments earlier began to fade into uneasy murmurs, like the dying embers of a fire struggling against an encroaching wind. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances that carried more weight than words ever could. What had started as dismissive amusement now gave way to something deeper, a gnawing sense of curiosity tinged with doubt. Could this old man truly be telling the truth? Or was he merely spinning an elaborate tale designed to stir up trouble? Lisa, the young teller who had initially greeted him, remained frozen behind the counter, her eyes darting between the burlap sack and the stack of yellow documents now in Mr. Thompson's hands. Her initial reaction, polite skepticism mixed with suppressed giggles, had vanished entirely. In its place was a growing unease, a feeling she couldn't quite articulate but couldn't ignore either. She watched as Mr. Thompson flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing with each passing second. His polished exterior, once a shield of authority, seemed to crack under the weight of what he was reading. For his part, Mr. Thompson tried to maintain his composure, but it was clear that the contents of the documents were unsettling him. At first glance, they appeared ancient, their edges brittle and ink faded with time. Yet, despite their age, the details within them were startlingly clear. Names, dates, property deeds, and legal signatures painted a picture that defied logic, or at least the version of logic everyone had assumed until now. Each page revealed another layer of history, connecting dots that no one in the room had even considered before. These deeds, Mr. Thompson muttered again, this time louder, his voice betraying a mix of disbelief and awe. He turned to the old man, his expression unreadable yet undeniably shaken. "Where did you get these?" "They've been in my family for generations," the old man replied calmly, as if answering a question about the weather. There was no trace of triumph or vindication in his tone. Instead, there was a quiet dignity, a steadiness that commanded respect. "They are the proof of what was taken from us, and what I intend to reclaim." His words hung heavy in the air, resonating far beyond the confines of the bank's marble walls. For many in the room, this revelation struck a chord deep within, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about history and privilege. The United States past is riddled with stories of exploitation, theft, and systemic injustice, particularly when it comes to Black Americans. Land stolen through fraudulent means, businesses seized under dubious pretenses, wealth stripped away by those in power. These were not just historical footnotes, but lived realities for countless families. And here, standing before them, was a living embodiment of that legacy. As Mr. Thompson continued examining the documents, others in the room began to take notice. Customers who had laughed only moments ago now leaned forward, trying to catch a glimpse of the papers. Some whispered among themselves, speculating about their authenticity. Others sat quietly, their expressions shifting from amusement to contemplation. A few even pulled out their phones, snapping photos or recording videos, sensing that this moment might hold greater significance than anyone realized. One woman, an elderly white lady seated near the front, spoke up hesitantly. "I don't mean to interrupt," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But could someone explain what's going on? These documents, they're real." Before anyone could answer, the old man stepped forward, addressing the crowd directly. His posture was relaxed yet commanding, his presence filling the room in a way that demanded attention. "What you see here," he began, gesturing toward the documents, "is proof of ownership. My grandfather founded this bank nearly a century ago during Reconstruction. It was one of the few institutions created by and for Black families seeking economic independence in a world determined to keep us down. But when Jim Crow laws tightened their grip, powerful white businessmen conspired to seize control of our assets through fraudulent means. They forged documents, manipulated records, and used every tool at their disposal to steal what rightfully belonged to us." His voice grew stronger with each word, carrying a weight that silenced even the most skeptical listeners. "My family lost everything, not because we failed, but because we were robbed. These documents have been preserved for decades, waiting for the right opportunity to reclaim what was stolen. Today, that opportunity has arrived." The room fell silent once again, the kind of silence that feels almost tangible, pressing against your chest and making it hard to breathe. People exchanged guilty glances, their earlier laughter now replaced by a collective sense of regret. They had underestimated him, dismissing him based on appearances alone. To them, he was just an old Black man with a sack, a figure easily ignored or ridiculed. But in doing so, they had overlooked the resilience, dignity, and strength of someone who refused to let history erase his legacy. Even Mr. Thompson, usually unflappable in his role as manager, seemed visibly shaken. He placed the documents back on the counter carefully, as though handling fragile artifacts. Turning to the old man, he asked, "Why now? Why come forward after all these years? The old man smiled faintly, a hint of sadness lingering in his eyes. Because justice delayed is still justice worth pursuing, he said simply. And because the time has come for the truth to be known. Not just for me, but for all those whose stories have been buried beneath lies and greed. By this point, the atmosphere in the bank had shifted entirely. What had begun as a scene of mockery and dismissal had transformed into something profound, a moment of reckoning. The old man's declaration forced everyone present to grapple with uncomfortable questions. How much of what we believe about history is true? How often do we overlook the voices of those who have been marginalized? And how can we move forward without acknowledging the wrongs of the past? For some, the answers were too painful to confront immediately. One man, a middle-aged businessman dressed in an expensive suit, stood abruptly and hurried toward the exit, muttering something about being late for a meeting. Another customer, a young mother holding her child's hand, stayed rooted to her spot, tears welling in her eyes as she listened intently. Even the bank employees, who had initially viewed the situation as a disruption, now looked on with a mixture of awe and guilt. As the minutes ticked by, reporters began arriving outside, drawn by whispers of the unfolding drama. Cameras flashed through the windows, capturing images of the old man standing steadfast at the counter, his burlap sack resting beside him like a symbol of perseverance. Legal experts would soon arrive to verify the authenticity of the documents, but for now, the story belonged to the people inside the bank, to the customers and staff who had witnessed history in the making. In that moment, the old man wasn't just claiming ownership of a building or a business. He was reclaiming a piece of his family's soul, restoring dignity to a narrative that had long been suppressed. And whether they realized it or not, everyone in the room was part of that journey, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful declarations come not from those in positions of power, but from those who refuse to let the truth remain hidden. By the time legal experts and historians arrived at First National Bank, the air inside was electric with tension. The old man's documents had already begun to unravel decades of buried history, forcing everyone present to confront uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and justice. What started as skepticism quickly evolved into a collective reckoning, a moment where the past collided head-on with the present. The first step in validating the old man's claim involved a meticulous examination of the yellowed papers he had presented. These weren't just random scraps of parchment. They were carefully preserved records that told a story spanning nearly a century. Deeds, property titles, shareholder agreements, and correspondence painted a vivid picture of how the bank had originally been established and subsequently stolen from its rightful owners. Each document bore signatures, official seals, and dates that aligned seamlessly with historical events, leaving little room for doubt about their authenticity. Legal analysts pored over the documents, cross-referencing them with public archives and municipal records. One particularly damning piece of evidence stood out: a series of forged deeds dated back to the early 20th century. These fraudulent documents appeared to have transferred ownership of the bank from the old man's grandfather to a consortium of white businessmen under dubious circumstances. Historians noted that this period coincided with the height of Jim Crow laws, when systemic racism allowed such thefts to occur with impunity. The pattern was tragically familiar. Black families across America had their land, businesses, and wealth seized through similar means during this era. As the investigation deepened, more layers of corruption came to light. Letters written by the old man's grandfather revealed his desperation as he fought to retain control of the bank. In one letter addressed to local authorities, he pleaded for intervention, detailing how prominent figures in the community had conspired against him. "They seek not only my livelihood, but also my dignity," he wrote. "If I lose this battle, it will be a victory for injustice, and future generations will suffer for it." Those words resonated deeply with the crowd gathered inside the bank, many of whom now understood why the old man carried himself with such quiet resolve. He was honoring a legacy of resistance. For the old man, watching these revelations unfold was both cathartic and painful. He had spent years safeguarding his family's history, ensuring that the truth would not be lost to time. Yet, revisiting those memories brought back the sting of generational trauma. The stories passed down from his parents and grandparents about what had been taken from them. As he recounted these tales to reporters and curious onlookers, His voice remained steady, but there was an unmistakable weight behind his words. "My grandfather didn't just build a bank," he explained. "He built hope for our family, for our community, for all Black people striving for economic independence." This wasn't just a financial institution, it was a symbol of possibility. When it was stolen from us, something far greater than money was lost. His statement struck a chord with many in the audience. For some, it evoked personal memories of similar injustices faced by their own ancestors. For others, it served as a sobering reminder of the systemic inequities that continue to shape modern society. The old man's story wasn't unique. It was emblematic of countless untold narratives silenced by oppression. And yet, here was someone brave enough to stand up and demand accountability. Meanwhile, outside the bank, the story gained national attention. News outlets broadcast live updates, sharing images of the old man standing proudly beside his burlap sack. Social media buzzed with reactions, ranging from outrage over the historical theft to admiration for the old man's perseverance. Hashtags like #JusticeForthBankCounter and #ReclaimingHistory trended on Twitter, sparking conversations about reparations, land restitution, and racial equity. Activists saw this as a pivotal moment, a chance to shine a spotlight on issues that had long been ignored. Inside the bank, emotions ran high. Some customers expressed remorse for having laughed earlier, while others voiced anger at the systemic forces that had enabled such thefts to occur. A young African-American woman approached the old man, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said softly. "You're doing this for all of us." He nodded graciously, offering her a reassuring smile. It was clear that his fight extended beyond reclaiming property. It was about restoring dignity and inspiring others to seek justice for themselves. As the day wore on, the bank's board of directors convened an emergency meeting to address the situation. Facing mounting pressure from legal experts, media scrutiny, and public outcry, they had no choice but to acknowledge the validity of the old man's claim. Representatives issued a formal apology, promising to work toward restitution and ensure that the bank returned to its original purpose, serving as a beacon of hope for marginalized communities. However, the process of restitution wouldn't be easy. Decades of mismanagement and exploitation meant that untangling the web of ownership would require extensive legal proceedings. Moreover, questions arose about how best to honor the old man's legacy without erasing the progress made since the bank's founding. Would it remain a mainstream financial institution, or would it pivot to focus exclusively on supporting Black entrepreneurs and families? These were complex issues with no simple answers. Despite the challenges ahead, the old man remained optimistic. For him, this victory wasn't just about reclaiming a building or a business, it was about rewriting history. By bringing his family's story into the light, he hoped to inspire others to dig deeper into their own pasts, uncover hidden truths, and demand accountability for wrongs committed long ago. As evening fell, the bank emptied out, leaving only the old man and a few staff members behind. Standing in the lobby, he gazed around the space, taking in every detail: the marble floors, the gleaming counters, the vault doors that had once safeguarded dreams and aspirations. There was a sense of peace in his expression, as though he finally felt whole again. "This is just the beginning," he murmured to himself, clutching the strap of his burlap sack tightly. "The truth has been spoken. Now, let's see what we can build together." And with that, the old man stepped out into the night, carrying not just his sack, but also the promise of a brighter future, one rooted in justice, resilience, and hope. The days following the old man's bold declaration transformed into weeks, and then months, as the story of his family's stolen legacy continued to ripple through society. What had begun as a quiet act of reclaiming history inside a bustling Atlanta bank grew into a national conversation about justice, equity, and reparations. For the old man, this period was one of profound redemption, but it was also marked by deep reflection on the cost of such victories and the lessons they carried for future generations. In the immediate aftermath of the revelation, the media coverage reached fever pitch. Reporters from major networks camped outside the bank, eager to capture every detail of the unfolding drama. Documentaries were commissioned, podcasts recorded, and think pieces written, all exploring the implications of what many called the most extraordinary restitution case in modern American history. The old man became an unlikely celebrity, his face appearing on television screens and magazine covers across the country. Yet, despite the sudden attention, he remained steadfastly humble, refusing to let fame overshadow the purpose of his journey. "This isn't about me," he would say whenever reporters pressed him for personal anecdotes. "It's about my grandfather, my parents, and all those who came before me. They fought for this, not just for themselves, but for everyone who believes in fairness and truth." His words resonated deeply with audiences, particularly Black Americans who saw echoes of their own struggles in his story. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like #LegacyRestored and #TruthMatters, amplifying calls for systemic change. Activists seized upon the moment to advocate for broader reforms, including land restitution, financial reparations, and greater accountability for historical injustices. The old man's victory wasn't just symbolic. It served as a catalyst for long-overdue conversations about racial inequality and economic empowerment. For the employees and customers of First National Bank, the transformation was equally profound. Many of those who had laughed at the old man's initial claim now approached him with apologies and expressions of admiration. Some offered heartfelt gestures of support, while others simply listened intently as he shared stories about his family's resilience. Even Mr. Thompson, the polished bank manager, who had initially dismissed the old man's assertion, underwent a visible shift. Once skeptical and defensive, he became an ally, working tirelessly to ensure that the restitution process unfolded fairly and transparently. "It's easy to judge someone based on appearances," Mr. Thompson admitted during an interview. "But when you look past the surface, you realize how much strength and courage it takes to stand up for what's right. This experience has changed me, and I hope it changes others too." As legal proceedings moved forward, the complexity of the restitution process became apparent. Decades of mismanagement, mergers, and corporate maneuvering meant that untangling the web of ownership required painstaking effort. Teams of lawyers, historians, and financial experts collaborated to piece together the bank's convoluted history, ensuring that every step aligned with both legal standards and moral imperatives. While some stakeholders resisted the changes, fearing losses or disruptions, public pressure ultimately compelled them to cooperate. One of the most significant decisions involved the bank's future direction. After extensive consultations with community leaders, activists, and descendants of its original founders, including the old man himself, the board voted unanimously to rebrand the institution as a community-focused financial hub. Renamed Heritage Bank, it pledged to prioritize services for underserved populations, offering low-interest loans, financial literacy programs, and grants for Black entrepreneurs. A mural depicting the old man's grandfather adorned the building's exterior, serving as a permanent reminder of the bank's origins and mission. The renaming ceremony drew thousands of attendees, including local politicians, civil rights icons, and ordinary citizens inspired by the story. Standing before the crowd, the old man delivered a speech that brought tears to many eyes. "Today, we honor not only my family's legacy, but also the dreams of countless others who dared to believe in a better world," he said. "This bank was born out of hope, stolen through greed, and restored through perseverance. Let it remind us that no matter how dark the night, dawn always breaks, and justice, though delayed, is never denied." His words struck a chord, galvanizing listeners to take action in their own lives. Across the nation, similar cases of stolen property and wealth began surfacing, prompting renewed efforts to address historical wrongs. In some instances, families successfully reclaimed land or assets taken from them generations ago. In others, communities rallied to preserve sites of cultural significance threatened by development. The old man's story ignited a movement, proving that individual acts of courage could spark collective change. Yet, amid the triumphs, there were moments of bittersweet reflection. For the old man, the journey had been long and arduous, marked by years of sacrifice and struggle. He often spoke of the toll it had taken: sleepless nights spent poring over documents, battles with institutions reluctant to acknowledge wrongdoing, and the emotional weight of carrying his family's pain. There were times when he questioned whether the fight was worth it, whether the scars of the past could ever truly heal. "I don't regret any of it," he told a close friend during a rare private moment. "But I won't lie, it hasn't been easy. Every step forward felt like swimming against a current determined to pull me back. And sometimes, I wondered if anyone would care enough to listen. Despite these challenges, he never wavered in his resolve. His faith in justice, and in humanity, kept him going, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. That unwavering determination inspired countless others, reminding them that change, though difficult, is always possible. As time passed, the old man found solace in seeing the tangible impact of his efforts. Heritage Bank flourished, becoming a model for inclusive banking practices nationwide. Families who once struggled to access capital now thrived, launching businesses and securing homes thanks to the opportunities provided by the institution. Young people, inspired by the old man's story, pursued careers in law, finance, and activism, vowing to continue the work he had started. On a personal level, the old man reconnected with parts of his identity that had been overshadowed by decades of advocacy. He spent more time with his grandchildren, sharing stories of their ancestors and instilling in them a sense of pride in their heritage. Together, they visited the farm where his grandfather had once lived, walking among fields that had nourished generations. Though much had changed, the land still bore traces of its storied past, a testament to resilience and endurance. Looking back on everything he had accomplished, the old man often reflected on the nature of justice itself. Was it merely about reclaiming what had been lost, or did it encompass something greater? For him, the answer lay in the connections forged along the way. The bridges built between strangers, the empathy awakened in skeptics, and the hope reignited in those who had almost given up. Justice, he believed, wasn't just about restoring balance, it was about creating a foundation for a brighter future. There will always be challenges, he said during a final televised interview. But if we approach them with honesty and humility, we can find solutions that benefit everyone, not just a select few. My family's story is proof of that. With those words, the old man stepped gracefully into retirement, leaving behind a legacy far greater than any title or fortune. He had reclaimed not only a bank, but also a piece of history, and in doing so, he had reminded the world of the enduring power of truth. And so, the tale of the old black man with the sack ended not with bitterness or regret, but with redemption and renewal. It was a story of resilience in the face of adversity, of dignity in the pursuit of justice, and of hope in the promise of tomorrow. Through him, countless others found inspiration to seek their own truths, proving that while history may attempt to erase certain narratives, it cannot silence them forever.